What I'd like to do is offer a quick prayer over our gathering and over our food. So if you will just join me by bowing your heads for just a moment. Loving God, we thank you for all of the gifts that you give us and for gathering us today. Please bless each one of us and the work we do as we accompany one another in fulfilling the mission of John Carroll University. Bless, too, the food that we share, the people and communities that grew it, and the hands that have made it and brought it to us today. Keep us ever mindful of those who go without food, friendship, housing, clothing. Bless our speaker, Father Tim Kesicki, your servant and alum of John Carroll. Open our hearts to hear his message of faith, justice, hope, and reconciliation. We pray this in your most holy name. Amen. So I'm very, very pleased to welcome back Father Tim Kesicki, who is an alum of the class of 1984. He is currently the rector of the Bellarmine House of Studies at St. Louis University. But before this, he served as president of the Jesuit Conference of the United States and Canada in Washington, D.C. He served also as provincial superior of the Chicago-Detroit provinces from 2008 to 2014, and before that was president of our own local St. Ignatius High School from 2000 to 2008. He has done graduate work in philosophy, theology, and educational administration at Loyola University Chicago, Santa Clara University, Xavier, New Orleans, and Columbia University Teachers College. He has ministered with the Jesuit Refugee Service in Uganda and secondary schools throughout the Midwest. He currently serves on many different boards. A few of them are Loyola University Chicago, the Pine Ridge Indian School in South Dakota, the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation Solidarity Council on Racial Equity. Father Kesicki entered the Jesuit order in 1984 after graduating from John Carroll University and was ordained a priest in 1994. He has served as a contributor on CNN, NBC News, as well as National Public Radio, and since he has been back at his alma mater, we found out a fun fact. Not only has he been to the top of Griselli Tower, he has in fact rappelled down the tower while he was an undergrad, in what we understand was a sanctioned activity. So without further ado, please welcome back Father Tim Kesicki.
Thank you. Not only was it a sanctioned activity, I was actually given academic credit for it. It was a military science class which everyone took solely to rappel the tower. I know some of you heard me last night, and sometimes you get anxious when you're going to hear someone back to back. There's a very famous Jesuit at the University of Central America. His name is Father John Sobrino. And anyone who studied, especially the martyrs of the Jesuits, knows the significance of John Sobrino. So I met some Jesuits from UCA who had him. I said, that must have been remarkable. They said, we had him for everything. We called his courses John Sobrino, A New Hope. John Sobrino Strikes Back. The Return of John Sobrino. I said, now you can go back for the prequels and then the following sequels. I promise this talk, if those of you who heard me last night, is not Tim Kesicki Strikes Back. It's not a repeat of last night. And I'm going to talk more to you who have the care and the mission of John Carroll University. I was blessed to be in this room. We actually used to have masses in this room. It was called the Jardine Room. I think that has since moved. And so in one sense, it's a very different institution from the one I attended in 1984. But in many senses, I walk around the quad, and especially as I see the students, I feel a similarity, almost a timeless quality to the institution that shows that some of the bones of the university are still here and intact. I'm going to look at Jesuits today. We're going to look at some demographic information and some changes affecting the Society of Jesus, but we're going to bring it back home to John Carroll and how it affects you. And I want to show, two Jesuit faces, the face of a Jesuit on campus today and the face of a Jesuit when I was here. And I know you all recognize one of the faces. He paid me to put his mugshot up there. Brother Matthew Wooters, who is an alumnus of Georgetown Preparatory School, John Carroll University. I don't know how many of you even, just show of hands, does anyone even recognize the person, the other Jesuit on the screen? So there's a few of us who know that this was the president of John Carroll University when I was a student here. His name is Father Thomas O'Malley. He has since died. He was a dean at Boston College before assuming the presidency here, and he was never ashamed to tell people that he grew up on a pig farm in Massachusetts. Someone had given the school a convertible, which he used, I think, only to go around the track at football games with the back down. It had the vanity license plate JCU, and he affectionately referred to it as the pig mobile. He could preach with great eloquence, often telling jokes where the punchline was in Latin. You didn't laugh at the time, but once you studied what it meant, you actually did. I was giving a talk actually to secondary school educators in Boston at the College of Holy Cross in 2008. I had just become provincial. And I went back to dinner at St. Mary's Hall at Boston College, and he grabbed me and he wanted to have dinner with me because he knew of my history here in Cleveland. And he told me that his greatest years of ministry were here, the 8 years he had at John Carroll University. Now, I highlight the difference because when I was a student here, the president was a Jesuit. The Jesuits lived in Rodman Hall. It seemed every semester I had at least one Jesuit for class. The Jesuit presence and ethos in the school was substantially different than it is today. But I want to be very clear in saying that I don't think that what our education focuses on is different. I don't believe that the mission of the institution has changed. I believe that if Jesuits have done one thing well in the now 40 years since I was graduated from this institution, is that we share our pedagogy, we share our spirituality, we share our mission in such a way that I believe everyone in this room carries on the mission of John Carroll University. I put Brother Wooters, and it could be Father Pip, it could be Father McAniff, it could be others, faces up there to say, you still want to do that in partnership, in collaboration with Jesuits, but we needn't have a Jesuit president or a robust number of Jesuits for the mission of this university to thrive. We know that this marks 52 years of men and women for others, and last night I gave a much more expansive talk on the history of this mission, but I really want to focus on a key figure who I hope never leaves our active imagination or memories, and that is Father Pedro Arrupe SJ. Quick show of hands, how many have ever heard of Father Pedro Arrupe? Thank God there's a rich show of hands, because Arrupe is very dear to the heart of the Society of Jesus. This is an interesting image of Arrupe, and I share it for two reasons. First of all, you see him with a lab coat on. Arrupe wanted to become a physician. He did not want to become a priest. But some significant things happened to him when he was young. He only met the Jesuits in 1 year of school, but he had lost his mother as a young age, and then soon his father died. And the death of his parents brought him and his siblings together, and he discerned that God was, in fact, calling him to be a healer, but not necessarily a healer of bodies, a healer of souls. Now, he's actually doing something medical here because he had two real formative experiences in his life. One, losing his parents at a young age. The second was he was a missionary to Japan. And he was that age where you kind of left your culture so that you could live and give your heart to another culture. And he did that to Japan. He became the novice director, which is the house where Jesuits are trained. And as novice director, he was there on that fateful day in 1945 when the atomic bomb fell and destroyed the city. Well, he was far enough away from the blast to not suffer the effects of the radiation. They certainly felt and experienced it. And if you ever have the opportunity to read his reflection from that day, I recommend it. I just say, as an anecdote, I was president of St. Ignatius High School on September 11th, 2001. We all remember that day. Looking around, many of you remember that day. And I remember a number of teachers wanted to bring everyone into the chapel, and so we did. And I wanted to lead them in prayer, and I thought, well, what shall I pray? And I went and found Father Arupe's reflections the day the bombs fell on Hiroshima, to see a faith-filled response to the tragedy of human war, human terrorism, and human evil. I share this photo because the priest who wanted to be a doctor is treating a survivor of the Hiroshima attack. And I believe that this played a formative role in our adopting the motto, men and women for others. Here are pictures of Arupe. One you can see with his shoes off, in a posture that was not necessarily traditional to how one would have prayed in the 1960s. Most would have been on a padded kneeler with their arms like this. You can see that he had spent time in Japan. He'd come to understand Buddhism. And I'm not calling Father Arupe a syncretist who was bringing Buddhism and Christianity and trying to fuse a new religion. No, he was recognizing that he could still be a devout Christian, praying with some of the asceticism that he learned as a Buddhist. And if you look at the other picture of him like this, a very common greeting in South Asia, and you can see from those in the pictures that he's probably either in India, in Bangladesh, Nepal, or Sri Lanka, but showing the importance of loving and embracing other cultures. Here he is near the end of his active life. He suffered a stroke which incapacitated him. He's on the roof of the Jesuit headquarters in Rome with St. Peter's behind him, taking all of this robust experience from his childhood in the Basque region of Spain to the experience of the Second World War in Japan, and helping the church to grow in its commitment to justice. Arupe's election as Superior General was perhaps the defining moment of the Jesuit order in the modern age, especially following the Second Vatican Council. And so we do want to keep Arupe's inspiration deep in our hearts, the author of the motto we use for Jesuit education, and one who set us on a trajectory, on a course for that expression of faith that does justice. 2 years after Father Arupe wrote that famous Men and Women for Others speech, which he delivered in Valencia, Spain, to the World Union of Jesuit Alumni, he convened a general congregation, which is one of the highest meetings of Jesuits. It's the supreme legislative governing authority in the Society of Jesus. And this is, as I spoke to at greater length last night, if you want to see, I guess it was videotaped, you can see that video if you want to get into the meat of this. But this is where this relationship between faith and justice really began to flourish in the Society of Jesus. This is what the Jesuits looked like at that time. The Pope was Paul VI. And Paul VI, when he addressed the Jesuits at this very famous meeting, gave a line that I will never forget. As a young Jesuit, it had a huge impression on me. He says, wherever in the world the trials have been the greatest, in the social trenches, in the battles of war, where the burning exigencies of the time have met the perennial message of the gospel, there the Jesuits have been. And if you would just hold those two in tension, the burning exigencies of the time and the perennial message of the gospel, that is, in a nutshell, our whole approach to faith and justice. That crossroads, to bring them together, that intersection of faith and justice, that intersection between the high moral value teaching in the gospel and what is most plaguing people, especially the people who suffer the most today. Little fun fact, if anyone no, Father Rupe is the one in glasses. There was another important Jesuit at that meeting in 1975, and some of you may recognize him. He was the provincial of Argentina, Uruguay. He's in his 40s in this picture. His name is Jorge Mario Bergoglio. And Jorge Mario Bergoglio doesn't go by that name anymore. He goes by the name Pope Francis. But he also was present at this meeting. And I want you to think, if you're imagining the Jesuit approach to faith and justice, and some of that teaching that Paul VI gave us, see that in so much of what's happening. In this March 13th will be the 12th year of Francis's pontificate. So you can see the influence that this general congregation and the intersection of faith and justice has had on the Catholic Church. I want to look at the state of the Society of Jesus today, and just for fun, let you know this is a group of us on that spot. That's the rooftop of our curia. And we're getting ready for what was called the 36th General Congregation, representatives from Jesuit provinces throughout the world. The one with his back to us was the existing Superior General, Father Adolfo Nicolas, a moment of levity because we were posing for a formal picture. But I will say that whenever I'm at a gathering of Jesuit representatives from around the world, I'm blessed with a global view of the world, which I think helps us to recognize that to be a Jesuit school, yes, it's a local school. Yes, Cleveland and this part of Ohio has a context, but we should also recognize that our education is linked to a global network of Jesuit schools. Now, this is a kind of a map of the world, and Jesuits compartmentalize that map. We divide it into regions called assistancies. So there's Jesuits in Asia Pacific and South Asia and Africa, Madagascar, Central Europe, Western Europe, Southern Europe, parts of Latin America, Canada, and the US. And I want to look at some actually demographic information, how the numbers of Jesuits have changed in the past 50 years. Now, you're going to notice that there's a rather sharp reduction in the total number of Jesuits. I'm going to put those numbers in context. But I also want you to see where the Jesuits, thus I believe the Catholic Church is growing, and where the influence of the Catholic Church is fading. If the Jesuits are, for lack of a better word, a microcosm of what the global church looks like, what does this data tell us? So let's begin with Asia Pacific. 1965, there were 1,995 Jesuits in Asia Pacific. I will say that many of these were concentrated in countries like Australia, Japan, the Philippines, where there was a strong traditional Catholic presence. That number has dropped, but not dramatically, to 1,485. And while we've seen a drop in Australia and Japan, we've seen an incredible increase in places like Myanmar, Timor-Leste, Vietnam, countries that weren't traditionally Catholic. And so one of the things that we're learning from our experience in Asia Pacific is we're growing faster in traditionally non-Catholic areas. And as you'll soon see when we go to Europe and Latin America,
reducing quite significantly in historically Catholic areas. If we move to South Asia, which again is primarily India, but also takes into account Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, we see a marked increase in Jesuits, 3,485. And I find that very interesting. There are probably as many Catholics in India as there are in the United States. But we're, 360 million in the United States? They're over 1 billion in India. So the percentage of Catholics in India, it might be single digits. I don't even know it's a full 1%. If ever you meet somebody from South Asia and they tell you, I went to a Jesuit school, you can say to them, did you go to Xavier? And they'll get all excited. Oh, how do you know my school? Because just about every school in South Asia is called Xavier. If we move to Africa, Madagascar, you can see a growth in the total number of Jesuits. 654 in 1965, up to 1,707. We actually have a happy problem in the area of Africa and Madagascar. There are way more applicants than there's room in our novitiates and in our study programs. And so sadly, sometimes very quality people are turned away. If some of them can get to another part of the world, they'll try to enter a novitiate where there is space. So Africa, Madagascar is growing. This is largely in sub-Saharan Africa because the northern part of Africa is largely, but not totally, Islamic. But we believe that Africa, Madagascar will be a major place for Jesuits. So if you look at Asia Pacific and parts of the global south, you see an increase in Jesuits. And I would posit that this is going to be a very important place for the future of the church. Coming up to Europe, you're going to see the number of Jesuits in very, very steep decline. Central Europe, which accounts for certainly Russia, is enormous, but Lithuania and Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Poland, Croatia, all of those countries, many of the former Warsaw Pact countries, for those of you who remember the Cold War, we see more than cut in half, but it was never a very, very large population of Jesuits. It becomes far more drastic in Southern Europe. Look at those numbers, from 7,396 to 1,820. And that's primarily Italy, Spain, Portugal. Now you can throw Malta and Slovenia in there, but I don't think those are the game changers, sorry to say. No, I do not mean to impugn the great Slovenians and Maltese present in this room today. But we see a major and drastic reduction in Southern Europe. This was obviously a cradle of Catholicism. And I think it's a bellwether for us because the drastic reduction isn't like because they're all becoming Franciscans or Dominicans. No, the drastic reduction is most are disaffiliating or no longer identifying with the Catholic Church. Western Europe was not as robust, but again, you're primarily talking about the United Kingdom, Ireland. You're also talking about what they call the Low Countries, which is the Netherlands and the Flemish part of Belgium. Talking about France, Western Europe, again, drastic reduction, especially in a place like Ireland, very, very Catholic country. Now, of course, many came to the United States and migrated to other places, but I'll never forget the year that it was under the pontificate of Pope Benedict XVI. The Irish people welcomed the Queen of England for a state visit to Ireland and did not allow Pope Benedict XVI to visit. And there was rapprochement with the United Kingdom. There was a great deal of animosity following the clerical sexual abuse crisis. So again, you look at these historic moments and you say, this tells us something. So we look to Europe, and I say it's important that we look to Europe because, again, this is just one little snapshot of data. But if the United States is trending in the direction of Europe, are we moving toward a further and further disaffiliation with our Christian roots? South America, again, and this is, Brazil's a huge part of this, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, Venezuela. This is a part of South America. We see more than cut in half. And this was all a very strong, traditionally Catholic area. Many always say, well, the church is thriving in Latin America. Actually, the data suggests otherwise. This is what we call more real Latin America. We're talking Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean. Again, more than cut in half. We're going to end here. You're going to see another really drastic reduction. Canada, United States. At one point there were 9,637. We're 2,042. Now, I don't know, for those of you who are writing down and are great with numbers, you might figure out that there's still the most Jesuits are in Europe. The second highest population of Jesuits is in South Asia. We're the third highest population of Jesuits, which suggests that the world still looks to us for direction and the future. I would also say that, and I'm going to show some of this in a moment, that despite some of these demographic challenges, we're still considered a very influential part of not just the Society of Jesus and the Church. So if you look at the total number, you can see that in 1965 there were 36,038. Now there's 14,422. I always think it's interesting if you could parallel this, and a good sociologist, there are probably statisticians here who could do it, but to try to do a parallel of the number of Jesuits as it goes down versus from those traditional areas, the number of people who used to identify as Roman Catholic and disaffiliate, I think you're going to find some parallels. Now, I think it's always important to take the data and know it, but to contextualize it. Because here's a bar graph of 1910 to 2010, number of Jesuits worldwide. And you can see we're about where we were in 1910. So there's two ways of interpreting this data. One way is to say, oh my God, we're on a downward trajectory. But there's a Jesuit novice over there, and his novitiate is fairly full. I'm in a house of formation where we're still getting a lot of young people. We are not dying. We have over 300 men in training to be Jesuits in the United States. Sometimes we have to look at that the period from 1910 to 2010 may have been a bubble in the growth of the society. And that's something that's going to have to be studied. So I always think while we have to look at some of the sobering statistics, we should never feel a sense of abandon. And that's something, well, I'm glad there's universities. This is the kind of data that needs to be studied so it can be contextualized. Now, I share that data because something did not go down. If you look at the total number of schools, there are now 63 traditional high schools in North America. That's up from 1965. So while there were fewer Jesuits, the Jesuits heeded that advice of Paul VI to, in a sense, go to the crossroads of ideologies and the perennial message of the gospel. There was more and more emphasis on going to new places. Jesuits are not solely responsible for Cristo Rey schools, but we were the incubator for Cristo Rey schools. And where did the Cristo Rey school concept come from? I don't know how many of you have ever heard the term fe y alegria, faith and joy. But in Latin America, there were all these kids not going to school. And the reason they weren't going to school is because they had to stay home and tend to the livestock or tend to the crops, which wasn't a full-time job. And someone came up with the idea, how about there's five families around here. How about 5 each take turns caring for each other's livestock or crops so that you can go to school 4 days and one of you can stay home and do the chores that are needed to supply your family. And these Fe y Alegria schools just exploded over Latin America. So in the poorest of the poor areas, this could happen. Well, the Jesuits figured out how they could do that in North America, creating a work-study school. The first school opening in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, showing again that commitment to faith and justice that says not be inhibited by our numbers. Let's not look at what we can't do, rather imagine what we can do. 18 nativity schools. These are generally middle schools for people who cannot pay tuition. Almost all of them are tuition free. I know here in Cleveland they just opened the Welsh Academy, a non-traditional school, which is not exclusively geared to send students to St. Ignatius High School, rather an opportunity for that institution to use its influence to help to further the mission of Jesuit education. So the global network of Jesuit schools, and this is far more data than you want to read, but you could Google and find this map quite easily, shows that even though the number of Jesuits in the world has been cut more than in half since 1965, the number of Jesuit institutions has almost doubled. Which again, as I began this talk, I said, it's not just the Jesuits who do this, it's our partnership, our collaboration that makes things happen. I want to go to Latin America because I want to look at a significant figure. I've already showed his younger picture. Let's look at a younger picture. We all know who that is. There he is as Archbishop of Buenos Aires. And then Cardinal Bergoglio shared what I thought was a very important message. He gave this in 1992. He said, there are brothers and sisters who with their lives ask us, please, do not cross over to the other side, but instead discover in their wounds the wounds of Jesus himself. And let's stay with that image of crossing over to the other side. One of the hardest things I've experienced in any Jesuit institution is when it makes an efficient decision that seems to walk away from our commitment to justice, walk away from our motto, men who live for others, because the exigencies at the time said, this is one of those cases where we can't follow the gospel. We have to do what's most efficient for us. This is what I would liken to, and I think what Bergoglio was likening to crossing over to the other side. It's a tension we always feel, and this is not, again, to impugn the leadership of this institution or any institution, but to recognize that these are the challenges we regularly face. When I look at crossing over to the other side, let me just look at some categories. So let me put the first, marketing over mission. All right, we have to market the institution. Our vice president for institutional advancement is here. I'm sure there's people on the admissions staff here. We desperately need you. Without you, we're not running. And marketing is important. I say marketing over mission because sometimes the tendency exists where our talking points, our public relations strategy, takes precedence over who we are as an institution. This would be one example. I'm not citing you, I'm saying this to all Jesuit institutions. One institution we should be on guard for, that concept that Bergoglio talks, crossing over to the other side. Second is this, a competition which seeks to eliminate another ministry. Now, I've been to meetings of the 27 AJCU presidents or Jesuit college and university presidents, and there's always a tension in the room. And I remember going to one of the lay presidents, not the Jesuits, and said, do you guys not like each other? Or is there something I don't know? And he said to me, he said, Tim, we're all in competition with each other. We're competing for students, we're competing for faculty, sometimes we're competing for programs, because unlike a secondary school where you're going to go locally, you can go anywhere for higher education. But that competition doesn't just happen between Jesuit institutions, it happens in higher education, and I understand in the state of Ohio, where there is a high number of private liberal arts colleges, one looks out at the demographics of the state and says, we know they're not all going to survive, and we should want to survive. But this is something that requires great care and discernment. How do we grow in such a way that doesn't look like our ultimate goal is to destroy our competition? Rather, it's to provide quality education for all who come to us.
Another, I think, way of crossing over to the other side, quantifiable success over qualitative. And I know we need, I'm sure the Higher Learning Commission is looking for a lot of quantifiable data. That's what the Higher Learning Commission does. I'm on the board of Loyola University of Chicago, and we're preparing for a visit of the Higher Learning Commission. So we know that. And data is essential. But so often, I can tell you, when advancement is trying to bring a student to talk to potential benefactors or the board, all of the experience is qualitative. All of it is qualitative because we know stories change lives. I used to be part of what we called, it was a way of assessing our secondary educational apostolate, and we always had a panel of students who talked to their visiting team about what they loved about the school. And we always wanted to go to the dean's office, that's the dean of students' office, and grab the first 3 kids that were kicked out of class that day and bring them into our visitation so we get a different perspective on the school. Obviously, we never did do that. It would be funny to do. I would tell you, that would be a great report, okay? But we understand how important we value the qualitative. Do we also value that qualitative experience in assessing how we're doing as an institution? Or, and again, remember that your budget is the operational embodiment of your mission. How we allocate our resources, how much of that goes to the qualitative experience of a Jesuit education, and how much of that goes to the quantitative experience. Again, that whole temptation of crossing over. Subordinating faith to value added instead of core value. I can begin with an example, and unless you're on the board of this institution, I don't think anyone here is. I cannot tell you how many board meetings I've gone to where we begin with a prayer and then we show Jesus the door. Because after we do the prayer, we don't want him. We don't want that. We got work to do. Okay, now that's a little bit of hyperbole, just a little bit. How often can faith, obviously, because we're a Jesuit Catholic institution, we highlight the faith aspect of it. But again, even looking at marketing versus mission, is it something we use to market? Is it something that we use to lure a certain demographic into the school? Or do people feel that at every level of the school? Again, faith is a core value. Finally, taming our lingo. Okay, I like words like cora personalis. I like words like magis. I like ad maiorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. All of these are Jesuit words. They're not exclusive to us, but we use them. I once did a Google search. There's a doghouse called magis. There's an easy chair called magis. How many awards do we have called magis? He's at the magis giving level. The worst thing I ever heard was one of our universities was really downsizing its faculty and staff, and they decided to call it the magis approach. They have destroyed that word at that institution for the next 25 years. Okay. Our lingo is sometimes that just lingo. But when we take some of those words, even the word Ignatian, and we use it to describe everything, we can so domesticate and tame it that suddenly what a Jesuit education is more like a tagline than a defining characteristic. Back to South America, and I'm spending a little time on Pope Francis because I think he does have something to say and he has a global perspective. None of us expected from the College of Cardinals that he would be elected. I remember where I was on March 13th, 2013, and when I heard them say the name Bergoglio, and I said he was the only Jesuit there, and they elected him, they're suppressing the Society of Jesus. I thought it was 1773 all over again. He came out on the balcony. I'd never seen him before. And every picture I ever saw of him, he had glasses and a scowl. Even now, see, he's scowling. He doesn't look very happy. And I said, oh my God, the world's about to see the first mean pope. But he came out with that beautiful smile. He said in Italian, cari fratelli e sorelle, buonasera. And there was a sweetness to him, and we see that the rest is history. I want to look at a sermon, again, there's the Cardinals, there's him. I want to look at a sermon he gave in which he gave a very helpful distinction. And he uses a distinction between keeping watch and watching over. He says, when you watch over people, you're more concerned for doctrine, for habits. You're kind of an overseer, a gatekeeper. When you keep watch, that means you're beside people. You're more concerned that there be salt and light in people's hearts. In the sermon he went on to say, when you're watching over, you're awake, you're sharp, you're quick, you're ready to pounce. When you keep watch, you're meek, patient, constant, and proven charity. When you watch over, there's a certain degree of necessary control. I'm in charge here. I'm going to make the final decision. When you keep watch, there's the hope of the merciful Father, God, who keeps watch over the hearts of God's children. We watch over, we're always alert to imminent danger. Risk management. We must protect ourselves. That must come first. We keep watch, we patiently trust in the salvation of God. And I want to ask ourselves, before I go to a final image and open it to questions, as you think of your relationship with our students, or for those of you who collaborate and care for one another, how much of our job is keeping watch? And how much of it is watching over? It's a both and. I don't want to make it a facile distinction. But how do we hold those two in balance? That we both watch over, and some things when we give grades, yeah, we're watching over. But how do we also keep watch? One of the greatest lessons I learned as a first-year teacher was when I learned from my students. And they always told me that there were students who would be smarter than me. But it wasn't just that a student caught me in something wrong and I said to the kid, yeah, that was the point of the lesson, and readjusted. And I did do that on more than one occasion. I'm not talking about some self-effacing humility. I'm talking about those times that we actually learn something from a student, the grace that comes from keeping watch. Now, I'm going to show around, this is Italy, and you see where the star is? That's a part in Sicily, and the place in Sicily is called Messina. And Messina is the very first Jesuit school. Now, is that our greatest school? Is that like, wow, it's our first school, so that's where the Jesuits put all their resources? Messina is a ruin. It closed. It no longer had an opportunity to continue. But then look at that global map of Jesuit education, and you realize that particular location didn't succeed, but the mission has grown into a global enterprise. I think it's a call also for freedom, that sometimes there's one thing we're so attached to that without this, nothing can go forward. And that's the other thing we have to keep in tension. What might inhibit us from allowing our vision to go global? So I just ask these questions. I know this is a lunch hour and there's only 15 minutes left. How does our institution reflect the global mission of Jesuit education? When have we risked crossing over to the other side? And do I, to you, have any personal hopes or expectations for John Carroll? So thank you for your attention, and we have a little time for Q&A. If you got to leave, I know how that is. Please feel free to. Otherwise, we can have a little conversation.
Thank you, Father Kesicki, and I invite people to just raise their hands and I'll come over with the microphone. I was going to say, please make sure you introduce yourself, but I don't think you need to, Brother Matt.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for accepting me to the Jesuits. Tim was in charge when I applied, so he's to blame. I was wondering if you could quickly explain to the rest of us in the room who in your family got the Beaudry Award.
So if you go out there, there is the famous Beaudry Award, and you'll see in 1987, Mary Kesicki, and now she's Mary McDermott, received the Beaudry Award. I did not. In my year, Pete Francel received it. I wrote a letter for Pete recommending him for the Beaudry Award, so I will at least claim that. I thought he was a more worthy recipient. But I call my sister Madame Beaudry.
Any other questions? Sure.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed your talk last night and today as well. I'm really grateful that you're here. And for those who don't know, Arupe has his own imprint at our school through the Arupe Social Justice Scholars Program that John is running. So Arupe's talked about every semester, actually, through John's class and lived through. So I'm wondering if you might address sort of the role of the laity. I mean, this goes back into world laity, and in our institutions, the laity have, that is to say, sort of those of us who are uncollared, have a role to play in this education. I'm curious if you'd just like to expand or expound on the role of the laity in this, in Jesuit education.
So again, it was especially our 34th General Congregation spoke excessively, from the Jesuit context, building on the Second Vatican Council, of the role of the laity. And it outlined how much of the ministry we do in this institution does not have to be filled with a Jesuit. You know, there were people who said there can never be a lay president. Now only 4 of our universities have a Jesuit at the helm. 2 of them are going to be replaced. We don't even know. You could see today that there are no Jesuit presidents, but it's not just, it's all the leadership position. Okay, that's kind of a technical answer to your question. How do the laity share in the mission? So we know that a fundamental characteristic of being Jesuit is the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola, Ignatian spirituality. And as popes have reiterated over the centuries, that was Ignatius's great gift to the people of God, not to the Jesuits. Actually, Ignatius wasn't even a Jesuit when he did it. I mean, he became one, but he wasn't when he did it, the spiritual exercises. So he was a layman making the spiritual exercises. And I think it's important. Think about that. Ignatius was a member of the laity. He had some minor orders at the time, but that was, again, another technicality. So he was a member of the laity when he came up with, I think, what most defines Jesuits, our spirituality and the spiritual exercises. So, when I was an undergrad here, I made the spiritual exercises. My first director was a Jesuit. My second year, my director was a laywoman. And that was very helpful for my discernment because I recognized that you didn't have to be a Jesuit to do these things. The call of a Jesuit, sometimes it's easier for me to talk about that. It is a vocation within the church. We take our vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but most especially we make ourselves available to go anywhere in the world where the need is the greatest. Jesuits have to do that. In order for Jesuits to do that, to be free to go, for someone to come here and then go a year or two later, we do need that stable cohort of laity who don't take that vow to go anywhere at a moment's notice, to bring a certain sense of stability and gravitas to the institution. So let me just offer those, that could be a whole talk, to be quite honest with you, as an initial response to your question.
Any other questions? Sure, Brian.
This will be our last one, I think.
I'll set up a whole nother talk, actually, and ask about I don't want to say tension, but I suppose maybe a tension between faith and reason. And obviously, as a Catholic University, a Jesuit Catholic University, we're here to serve both of those things.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's a tension between them, or there could be.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit.
I do appreciate this question. So, and you can sit down. I don't want to force you to stand with the mic. So the Catholic intellectual tradition is a guiding factor in education, and that is I think that is a very broad category. So within the Catholic intellectual tradition, you can have all academic disciplines. I think, the University of Notre Dame, and along with Georgetown Boston College and others, when they met at the Land O'Lakes Conference, began to design kind of the Catholic Research University. And that was meant to broaden the relationship between faith and reason. What has happened over the years, you'll hear people very publicly critical of the Land O'Lakes Conference and how we interpreted that relationship between faith and reason, because they feel that it has compromised core tenets of the Catholic faith. And there are obviously instances at all of our institutions where academic freedom comes head to head with a central teaching of the faith. I think the most recent very public one was at the College of Holy Cross, where a professor of theology, very public, so you can Google it, Dr. Benny Liu, began to do a lot of questioning of the gender, sexual identity, orientation of Jesus Christ, which caused a lot of tension, a huge rift between the theology department and the bishop, and I think it's a tension that is still festering. That would be a high-profile one, but when we have those experiences is when this comes most to the fore. Now, I don't want to focus on that particular case, just use it as an example of such tension. One of the things I think every institution has to do is say, what is that moral line that we say, this we will accept and this we will not? And I must say, we painfully experienced a little of that last year when the United States House of Representatives brought the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and Penn, and it was a 3-hour questioning, but it all came down to one question on genocide that caused quite a furor. Now, I'm not casting judgment or aspersions on that. I mean, any politically motivated inquisition is politically motivated, let's admit that. But what it did reveal is there is a line. There is a moral line that people say, at this point, how much hate speech can one utter on a college campus or in a classroom, over which we say this has no place at our institution. So one of the things I think we have to do when we talk about faith and reason is say, how do we find that line? And I don't think there's a ready-made answer to that. The church has real clear lines when it comes to its doctrine. So when you're teaching Catholic doctrine, yeah, we have pretty clear lines. But when you start getting into all the academic disciplines, it becomes very, very challenging. One has often said, some bishops, because I had to work as provincial with a number of bishops, they have recognized the importance of academic freedom at a research university, and they recognize too that the religious order, the Jesuit order, can't control what everyone thinks or writes, especially in the era of social media. They have sometimes asked, when we feel that line is crossed in the Catholic context, is there someone at the institution who will represent the teaching of the church and why that is important? That's one possible answer to this. This is a question of huge debate. You're seeing a lot of breakaway higher ed institutions or parts of higher ed institutions that are claiming a greater purity or separation from what I would call the mainline academic establishment. I think this is a tension that we will continue to live with. But I'm going to end with one thing. Tension is not bad. Tension is what keeps a suspension bridge in the air. Tension can sometimes keep things in proper balance. So the important thing is that we don't ignore the tension or allow the tension to so escalate that everything snaps and falls apart. How do we hold those two in balance in an ongoing way so that the best traditions of the intellectual apostolate and the best traditions of a Catholic Jesuit university work with each other?
Please join me in thanking Father Kesicki. Your message is very inspiring for Mission Week because the way you highlighted the importance of the schools and the fact that they are run by lay people, and we all have this wonderful invitation to see ourselves as partners in mission and companions in mission with the Jesuits here. We have a wonderful Jesuit community, so thank you, Father, for being here and for all your support and the support of the Jesuit community in so many different ways. And thank you all for coming and for taking time out of your day to reflect on our mission. At your table, there are some things for you to take. There's a little reminder of our 3 new mission priorities. There's also a sticker for which encapsulates the first mission priority. You're welcome to take one of those. There's more at the exit if you want another. If you have time to stay before you go, and just take 2 or 3 minutes to fill out the mission survey that is on the QR code at the middle of your table. That would help us just capture your feedback and that we're looking for on our mission and the way you engage it. Last thing I'd like to say is a special thank yous. Phil mentioned how John Carly Buck is director of the Arupe Scholars Program. He was instrumental in coming up with this idea to bring Father Kesicki here and to help us think about faith, justice, reconciliation, hope around the 50th anniversary of the 32nd General Congregation. So thank you, John, and for the work you do with our Arupe scholars who carry forward this very important person in our heritage. But also I'd like to thank my colleague Diane McTeer, where are you, Diane? Right there, for all your work in orchestrating this. And Mac McDonald for being our recorder in your team, and our friends at Parkhurst and Dining feeding us. And also Rory Hill is so wonderful working behind the scenes to make sure that all of the rooms for Mission Week are up and running. So thank you, Rory. You're probably off setting up the next room. Quick announcement here. Still a lot of great things happening during Mission Week. For Mission Week tonight, there's an exciting engagement of our contemporary commitment to faith and justice with regard to Laudato Si and the environment. So tonight is the first of 7 online lectures or workshops on the environment. Tonight is, the series is called Envisioning a Livable Future. Our own Bernard Pruzak, Dr. Bernard Pruzak, and Sister Catherine Feely have been spearheading this this national project where, so if you are able to join us online tonight, 6:30, you can just register at one of the, you've seen a lot of the advertisements, but you could go on our poster here and register online, you get the link, or there's a watch party tonight over in Dolan at 6:30. I highly recommend, tonight the topic is the current state of climate science, so you can learn from experts, one of whom is Ben Sobukal, one of our own graduates, so internationally known climate scientists are going to be there. And then on Friday, there is a luncheon to learn about the Undesign the Red Line project that's back here that you can see for now and for the rest of the month, so that's Friday lunchtime. And quick plug, if you really would like to get a little walk around outside, Brother Matt is going to lead a pilgrimage of sacred places on campus at 3 o'clock on Thursday, and then there'll be yoga on Thursday at 5. So lots to do still this week. Join me one more time in thanking our